Block me and I'll block you. The latest twist in the Iran war that no one saw coming. US President Donald Trump has trumped the Iranians by blocking their blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. But will it work? And is this good, bad or worse? Ben Friedman is Policy Director at Defence Priorities, an American foreign policy think tank. What were your first thoughts when you heard the news?
Seems like a classic example of cutting off your nose to spite your face, where we've already learned from the past iteration of the war that Iran has an advantage in willpower. The United States sort of cried uncle in that we were under pressure. The Trump administration was under pressure from the public due to gas prices, obviously, and the oil war that Iran was prosecuting essentially successfully. And he's now sort of gambling that he can make Iran blink first in a contest of wills. So experience suggests that it's not going to work. I mean, this is going to make, if he actually executes it for a period of time, it's going to make the world oil shortage substantially worse. Those shipments that we're getting through, he's threatening to cut off anybody who pays Iran. So he's thinking this is going to be harder on Iran than it is on him. And I don't know on what basis one could possibly think that. So I don't think it's going to work. I think we're going to make the world economy a lot worse. And then the United States is going to be back in the same situation it was, where we're looking for a deal.
OK, well, let's go through some of the details so you can explain to our viewers why you think things are going to get worse. Here's what Trump posted. Effective immediately, the United States Navy, the finest in the world, will begin the process of blockading any and all ships trying to enter or leave the Strait of Hormuz. I've also instructed our Navy to seek and interdict every vessel in international waters that has paid a toll to Iran. Any Iranian who fires at us or at peaceful vessels will be blown to hell. Now, the Strait, of course, is the world's most critical maritime energy choke point we know of. Cutting it off has given Tehran leverage over the global economy. So, Ben, how's this going to work? I'm just reading the US will also be blocking all Iranian ports from 10 a.m. Eastern Time Monday.
Well, it seems that the assumption is that the Iranians need to export oil to run their economy. And, they were, of course, continuing to ship oil during the effective blockade that they put in place on the Strait of Hormuz for the last few weeks. And Trump has been thinking of various ways to cut that off, including this operation against Kharg Island that never really went forward. I mean, the potential ground operation. So he has this idea that he can squeeze the Iranians on oil exports and he will get them to accede to his negotiating terms. But it's very difficult to see why he thinks that, or at least why that makes any sense, because, the Iranians are up against the wall here. They are fighting what they think is a war, an existential war, a war of survival. I mean, Trump is talking about regime change. He tried to wipe out their leadership along with Israel. And even the demands now, which are reduced in the negotiations, are to essentially remove most of the means of deterrence Iran has. So I think the Iranians have an advantage in willpower, whereas we already saw that the United States will struggle, the leadership, the Trump administration will struggle to deal with rising energy prices. It creates great political pressure. So if you're cutting off Iranian oil and you're stopping anybody who pays a toll to Iran from shipping oil, the little bit of oil that was getting out through the Strait of Hormuz is going to go down to nothing. So we're taking a near total blockade and making it basically total, almost no oil going through. And the question is, who is that going to pressure more, Iran or the Trump administration?
It's also interesting to look at the comments coming out of Iran on Thursday. The new supreme leader said the country is entering a new phase in its management of the strait, suggesting the regime is doubling down on its weaponization of the waterway. It doesn't sound like they'll take this lying down. Like you said, they've got their backs to the wall. They've been cornered.
Yeah, I mean, they're cornered, but also I think they feel like they're in a good negotiating position. So they're cornered in the sense that they've been subject to all these attacks by the United States and Israel, had a lot of their leaders killed, suffered economic damage, and potentially will suffer much worse economic damage. But at the same time, the course of the war, I think, gave them confidence that they were winning in the sense that they could withstand this circumstance longer than the Trump administration. It's not that they're inflicting more pain on the U.S., it's that the stakes for the U.S. are so much lower that there's not going to be support for the war if it gets costly, and rising energy prices are an obvious cost. So I think the Iranians think this is their great weapon, cutting off the Strait of Hormuz, and this threat by Trump is, if anything, just going to enhance the power of their weapon. So it's almost like the Trump administration is working against itself here.
You said you don't think this is going to work, but could it also backfire? Could Trump's own blockade mean war again?
Well, yeah, I mean, he threatened war. He said, that he would be ready to go back into hitting them with airstrikes. So, the president has this habit or pattern where he makes escalatory threats, and he's kind of good at backing away from them, which is something that people make fun of him about. I'm not sure that it's not a good thing, but, he here is essentially saying, if you don't comply based on this sort of counter blockade, I'm going to escalate and continue the war. And again, I think the Iranians have shown that they're willing to withstand a lot of pain and continue firing missiles and cutting off oil. So it's not clear what the sort of theory of victory here is for Trump.
Okay, well, let's bring up a map of the US's boosted naval presence in the Strait, and maybe you can explain your skepticism here. The ships' locations are only approximate. For our viewers, the data is from the Israeli Institute for National Security Studies. But Ben, tell me, is that enough to do all the things Trump wants to do? He wants to block the blockade. He wants to block all Iranian ports. And I'm also reading he wants to escort or somehow allow free passage of ships that do want to transit and are somehow not on Iran's side, but will be delivering oil to the world. I'm not sure what he's getting at exactly. Maybe you can clarify that. How do you do all of that with that number of ships?
Well, I don't think there's enough ships to do all those missions, particularly if they're doing the escort mission. Obviously it depends if they get some help from other navies, but blockading oil ships is doable. Blockading all shipments is hard. Blockading all shipments while also doing an escort mission is probably going to be impossible given the numbers involved. No, I think the idea with the escorts is it's a sort of a classic mission, is to help bring the oil shipments that are willing to run the strait, whether it's from Saudi Arabia or wherever further up the Persian Gulf, through there and protect them. The problem is that the shippers won't do it. Maybe if the price gets high enough, maybe they'll start to say yes. But experience has shown that, particularly if they think this is going to be a short-term thing, and then the United States is going to cave or some arrangement can be made with the Iranians, the shippers are going to say, we'd rather just sit on this oil. It's not worth the risk to us. That's the experience we had away with the Houthis in the spring, and it's been the experience of the last few weeks. So even if you have some protection from the U.S. military, it's really about the risk tolerance of the people in those companies and their insurers more than the fact that they can be protected or not.
And the concern's not just Iran. You mentioned the Houthis there. There are so many different other players involved here, so many US military bases also to take into consideration. And then looking at that map of those ships, doesn't this idea of a blockade tie up a huge number of American warships all at the one time, all in the one place, when so much else can go wrong anywhere else?
Yeah, certainly. It's not just warships, also missile defense capabilities that have been deployed heavily to the Middle East, and that means that there's less available for Ukraine. That's not an issue with the Navy, but it's an issue certainly when it comes to China. If you're worried about potentially having to defend Taiwan or some other dust up in Asia, there's only so much U.S. Navy to go around. So, it shows, I think, that the Trump administration is doing something completely contrary to what they said in their national security strategy, where they said, the Middle East is going to be an area of decreasing importance, and we essentially need to make choices and hold on to our resources for more important things. They've done precisely the opposite here by tying up so much U.S. military strength around Iran and the Persian Gulf.
And Ben, you mentioned the possibility of other countries being involved here. Trump also said that. I mean, which ones?
Well, he's obviously been knocking on doors in Europe and making threats to NATO countries, apparently yelling at Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, the other day in a meeting about the lack of help from European allies in helping clear the strait. So I'm not sure if there'll be much participation from Europe. There's certainly reluctance, and there was some talk of being willing to do it in the event that there was a deal and the Iranians weren't going to shoot. But I don't know if the British or a couple of the other countries, France, that have bigger navies with more capabilities, are going to be willing to come. So I wouldn't be surprised if no one shows up, or at least no one with much naval capability that's really helpful in this circumstance.
Well, you mentioned the Brits. Let's listen to what the British Prime Minister said Friday after a phone call with Trump.
We've been pulling together a coalition of countries, now over 30 countries, working on a political and diplomatic plan, but also looking at military capabilities and actually the logistics of actually moving vessels through the strait.
Okay, I know it's very vague and he's just referring to military capabilities, but it does sound in a way like Starmer knew about Trump's blockade.
Well, I'm not sure if that's true or not. I mean, they were talking last week about this possibility of doing this kind of mission, even in the event of a successful ceasefire where there was less risk. But yeah, I mean, Starmer there was sort of talking about sending ships, or beginning a process that might lead to sending ships to the Persian Gulf, and in that event, it would take a few weeks to get there. So it's not the case that the Brits are sort of jumping into action. It sort of sounds like an attempt to sound compliant to impress Trump a little bit without actually having to show up. But I guess we'll see. Maybe I'm just too cynical.
Well, time is not on anyone's side here. Does Trump, though, have to play this card, or are there alternatives?
No, I mean, I think this, as I said, isn't going to work. So, no one is obligated to do something that's not going to work. And, the United States went into this negotiation in Islamabad asking for too much. We've been asking for too much for months, going back before the war. I don't think the United States needs that much from Iran. We really need one thing, which is to fix this problem that we caused by starting the war, which is the cutoff to the Strait of Hormuz. And I think if we had focused solely on that and said, look, we're going to stop attacks as we did in the ceasefire on a longer term basis, we're going to make a commitment to hold off not just our own military capabilities. We won't attack you again, but we'll assure you to some degree that we'll stop the Israelis from attacking you again as well. After all, this is the third iteration of the war, 2 with the United States involved, 3 involving the Israelis. So with those assurances and probably with some sanctions relief, I think you could get the Iranians to lay off the strait, but asking for the moon and then threatening them more, continuing a war that I think hasn't gone well for us, is not a winning formula. So there's a lot of better alternatives, including just doing nothing at all. I mean, potentially just saying, we're going to not fire at you and we'll hope that the situation in the strait will work itself out. That would even be better. But I think there was a diplomatic alternative if we offered them better terms.
But Ben, what do you think will happen next?
I think that negotiations are going to continue, even if it's in a less direct way than what happened in Pakistan, and there'll be some sort of renewed ceasefire or deal. I don't think that the United States is going to stick with this plan for long, basically because it doesn't make sense. And I think, if we sort of zoom out a little bit and look at the various pronouncements of President Trump, there tends to be a lot of noise, high noise to action ratio. So, and maybe in a few weeks that we'll sort of forget almost that the United States tried to do this counter blockade thing, and hopefully negotiations will bear some fruit. It's not gonna lead to some kind of grand bargain, but I think that there's a chance that we could get to sort of the status quo antebellum, which is to say the situation before the war, where the strait was opened and Iran was more or less left alone to develop missiles and so forth, fund proxies. I think we could get back to that situation. So I predict that after a little more fighting, we'll get there eventually.
Ben Friedman with the Defence Priorities think tank. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.
And thank you for watching. Let us know what your hopes are for peace in the Middle East. I'm Ben Fajzullin.